Hello, welcome to the Foodable I/O event, Feeding the Future here in Seattle. We're here today to talk about seafood sustainability, a big topic, and I'm thrilled to have with me three amazing professionals. Jennifer Bushman, who is the Director of Sustainability for Pacific Catch Restaurant Group, and Cami Couch, who is a fourth-generation Alaska fisherman. She's also a photographer and a filmmaker. And finally, Chef David NICHOLS, who is with the Seafood Restaurant Writer here in Seattle. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So today I'd like to talk about opportunities to educate consumers and partners and how we keep the sustainable seafood conversation interesting, relevant, and top of mind. Okay, so we've kind of all got different roles in this mission. And I'll start with you, Cami. You're a filmmaker and part of a long tradition of Alaska fishermen. What does seafood sustainability mean to you and your family? And how are you helping to further the message of sustainable seafood?
For me, growing up in the commercial fishing industry and the whole family heritage, it was just a way of life for us and a lifestyle. And sharing that with others was, really, really exciting. And I'm a photographer and I have a photography business and I've been also filmmaking. And so I wanted to share that experience with people. And so I would just bring my camera along and record what we were doing. And it was really awesome to see people's response to that. Like they got to be a part of it. There is a lot of science behind sustainability and a lot of data that goes into it. And a lot of the times when you start talking to people about that, it just goes right over their head. And so in making the films and just sharing that story with people, it connects with them on an emotional level, and it takes that science and that data to the average person that can totally understand what's going on and be a part of it. So.
Chef, tell me about your restaurant and what you feel the role of a chef is today when it comes to sustainable seafood.
We are a wood-fired seafood restaurant, a large space, 200 seats, just about 3 blocks down the street here. But we pride ourselves on local and sustainable seafood. When I first moved out here, that was kind of like what I really wanted to open a restaurant with. And so it took a little while to kind of work with purveyors, local fishmongers to kind of set this kind of program up. And it kind of was a little bit difficult, I think, at the start to kind of get this program kind of working. And coming from New York to Seattle, I think, getting everybody kind of on board. I think with Seattle, I think also we're kind of at this epicenter of where all this great seafood is. And so everyone's kind of throwing around these stories, and I think that's kind of like where this whole kind of like movement kind of starts.
Are people asking for sustainable seafood?
Much more now, I think, than like 10 years ago, I would say. I think like people want to know where their fish is coming from, like how it was raised. And it's a huge topic. I think it's also more of a trend. I think now, like people always like talk about food trends. I think sustainability is a trend it's not going away. I think it's something that is always going to continue to progress. And I think people who aren't kind of doing that are going to kind of like fall a little behind. But I think it's something that people want, and I think it's just going to continue to be this huge movement of sustainability at restaurants. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great thing. Also kind of with that though, you need that education, because with that also there's a price tag. I think from a chef's perspective, you pay a little bit more for wild and sustainable seafood. So if you're selling it without this story, like why it costs, we pay maybe $1, sometimes $2 more for some fish that is wild caught and sustainable, as opposed to just a cheaper product. And if we don't have that story or that reason why it's cost a little bit more for that consumer, then you're not going to be able to sell it. So there needs to be kind of this story and this reason that they're paying for this.
So that story is creating the value proposition.
Absolutely, and the quality also. It's a huge. It's apples and oranges, I think. And I think my restaurant also, we're attached to a hotel, so we aren't just getting people that are here in Seattle or from the Pacific Northwest. They're people from Minnesota or from the Midwest who aren't accustomed to this amazing local fresh product that I'm so accustomed to, or I'm sure you are too, Cami. But so it's this story that people kind of need to kind of to be educated about.
If I could touch on that really quick, I was actually a server in a farm-to-table restaurant that sold our salmon that we caught in Alaska, and it was probably the most expensive thing on the menu. And I would go to the tables, and they're like, "What do you guys have?" And I was like, "We got this fish right here and on the menu." And they would like, "Tell me about it." And so I just talked to them, and I go to Alaska with my family, and and they would buy it almost every single time. And it was just cool to me to see that like in play at the restaurant. That if like you were there, I was the server and just told them the story, and they're like, "That's what I want,"
That's great.
Every time. It was really cool.
That's great. So Jennifer, tell me about your role as Director of Sustainability at Pacific Catch, and why you think these issues of consumption in the U.S. are important, and your thoughts about that.
It's interesting. I feel like we're always kind of going back to the beginning as it relates to fish and seafood consumption and getting consumers to adopt that in their diets. I mean, the latest statistics, believe it or not, now say that consuming fish and seafood at home is actually in decline. The James Beard Foundation just did a study that said basically that what's rising is eating in restaurants rather than eating at home. And that is for a number of reasons. I mean, we're in decline because maybe we look at the fish and seafood case and we see 30 different species, but if we walk up to the chicken case, it's only one, and we know what that looks like and what that feels like. And maybe it's confusing. It costs more. It is harder to cook. I mean, there are all of these kind of barriers to entry. And so the result of all of that is that we only eat a very little amount of fish and seafood in spite of the fact that we know it's so good for us and that we should, I feel like we aspire to eat more, but we just can't quite get there. It's the minute that the husband says, no, I'm not going to eat that fishy fish or whatever. The kids don't want it. So I think that we have that piece of it as a barrier. And I also think that it's something that's maybe not as approachable as we would hope it to be. So for example, it's complicated. I mean, when David has to think about sourcing sustainable fish and seafood, the supply chain has not made that particularly easy. We are not just talking now about wild versus farmed. We're talking about a very very difficult navigating landscape. And so I think that part of it, at least at Pacific Catch, we have 8 restaurants. We're going to grow to 11 next year. We have 500,000 pounds of sourcing. It's been around for 15 years. And the assumption, I think, with that kind of trust in the Bay Area was that we were sourcing sustainably. And when it came to really digging in, believe it or not, a lot of those barriers sat with our suppliers because fish and seafood changes hands on average worldwide 9 times. This isn't necessarily a direct, it'd be awesome with Alaskan salmon, we know exactly where it comes from. But when I'm trying to source things like squid, because everybody likes to eat fried calamari on a menu, and if we're following and we're good stewards of Seafood Watch as a partner or James Beard Smart Catch, then I'm very limited in my resources to find and source supply that's the most important #1 selling appetizer on the menu. So it's something that I think the industry, we all have to come together to be able to get to a point where we all feel comfortable and have that trust of where we are. And I think that the interesting thing over these last few years is that distrust is just now trickling down to the consumer because of all of these articles, all of these issues. Oceana's study about the fact that 72% of the time when you see a fish on a menu or in a fish case, it's not what you thought you were buying. So we have some work to do.
How do we overcome some of these barriers then?
I think a lot of it, at least the experience that I have, is it's going to be driven by CEOs and buyers before it's really going to be driven by consumers. That they understand what the state of the oceans are, they understand what the issues are around trust in the supply chain, much more so than a consumer that comes into Pacific Catch, trusts us to give them a beautiful dish, and just wants to check sustainability off as a box. I mean, it's like, oh, I know it's sustainable, I go to Whole Foods, I buy good fish, check. Now I just figure out what I want to eat. So what we had to do was we went through, when I came on board, I had to go through and dig into a year's worth of invoices, which don't always say catch method, region where it's caught, all of those things. Dig into that and then sit with the suppliers, our CEO, COO, executive chef, and say, okay, now this is what's going to be happening moving forward. We're not going to allow any red fish, whether you follow the stoplight or not, it's kind of what we have. We have seafood watches, be able to follow their app or something, and follow that as a point of trust. And so we're not going to let any red through the door. And you have to say, okay, now every single month I get those velocities in from what we've been buying, and I'm tracking that through Fish Choice. So Fish Choice is actually a beautiful portal where we can put every single ounce of fish and seafood that we're buying and consuming into that app. And then it says, it tracks it, and it either qualifies or disqualifies you for the commitments we've made to Smart Catch through James Beard Foundation and Seafood Watch. So for us, what we say is it's about making sure we know what's coming, holding our suppliers accountable, but watching it every day because we're watching what's coming through the door, training our staff because staff training is so exceptionally important, and then it's sort of what the James Beard Foundation and others are calling storied fish, which is that we're closing that loop with the marketing and the engagement we have with the consumer so that we're trying to tell those stories on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's something that the seafood industry certainly has an opportunity to do more of. When you look at some of the other industries, like dairy or farming, I think that we know our agriculture farmers a lot more. I think they're more revered and thought of as these, heart of the work in the heartland and up early and all of that. And I don't think we've quite painted that picture of the fishermen. And we have a lot more opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even the people that are right there, like in the cannery working, we bring in the boats and they've got the cranes that pull the fish out, and even the people that are involved that closely still don't even know. It was really interesting to me. People still just don't even know.
And I think I would add to that. One of the things I speak a lot about this, spoke a lot on behalf of the film that we did, and I would say to the audience, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think of a picture of a farm. And most people would see, the waving wheat. That's even in our national anthem.
Right.
They would be able to see the barn, the red barn, and the paint peeling, and the White House in the background. And then I would say, now I want you to keep your eyes closed and picture a water farm. Whether it's an oyster farm, whether it's a sea veg farm, whether it's a salmon farm, close your eyes and picture the farm. And no one could. And so the goal that we had was to show the hard work that water farmers do that's no different than land farmers. And that by naming whether it's an orchard on your menu because that's where you got your peaches, or you named the farm where you got your greens, it was just as important to name the name of the water farm. Because without it, there's not the trust. We can't end up actually knowing, well, what farmers am I picking that's right? What fishery should I be buying from? And how do they know what to support if it's not in the case with the retailer on the tag with their name? Just like you buy Kleenex or you buy Q-tip, we buy by brand in the rest of our story journey. So we have to be championing. It's not just, well, maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't. We have to demand it, because if we don't, no one will ever know where our fish comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's to a good point. Like, I think all this kind of starts with trust. Also, like, our fishmonger, he literally comes down 3 times a week. Like, our staff knows him like by his first name. So I think it just is like just bringing these people in. From a chef's perspective, just getting them to know the people. So like they know like, oh, Will's here today, and so like when that fish comes in, our staff knows like this. They know that this person, where he's from, where he's fishing, knows what boat it came in on. It all just comes back to a story, I think, and that just is a huge, huge selling point for us in our restaurant.
Somehow, with the way in which our media has been talking about this issue around the oceans, we have learned to applaud our presence on land and our absence on the water. And what we have to do is learn how those things all work harmoniously, whether it's water farmers, whether it's commercial fishermen, whether it's the small fishermen, in a FIP program, in a fishery improvement program. We have to learn how to work harmoniously together. And I can tell you at Pacific Catch, what we see as the answer, the solution, is to source sustainably raised fish, because we do believe 60% of the fish and seafood we're eating is farmed now, and the oceans can't keep up with the commodity demand. So we have to give balance to that. That actually preserves the legacy of your family fishing, because we protect that through other salmon demand. And that then we also source responsibly from wild fisheries, and we source both frozen and fresh, because frozen is such an important part of our sustainability program, and there's such incredible frozen fish now, lower carbon footprint. So we think if we do all of those pieces in balance, that we're going to have a restaurant group that's going to be able to stay in business for generations to come.
I'm going to go back to the consumers again, because there's all sorts of studies, and I think you said that consumers are saying that they really care about what's on their plate. But I'm not sure that we always see that reflected in their purchasing decisions, or sadly always in the restaurant. So I think this remains one of the biggest challenges. I think we've been talking about ways to continue, I guess, bringing the consumers along that continuum. What are some other ideas? What else do you think? How else can we make that happen?
Well, I mean, I think there are there's great apps and stuff. I mean, I think I know about them. We kind of know about them, but I don't think the average person knows about these things. Like to look at, is this seafood at the store? To go and look at this seafood and is this a sustainable seafood from the grocery store? I think there's a lot of once it's in the grocery store or in the restaurant, they're going to assume that it's good to go and I trust you guys. So I think it's also kind of giving it back to, the consumer. Once it's caught and goes through all the channels, I think it's, they think it's ready to go, and they're trusting everybody else that it was kind of, sustainable, if that's what they're kind of looking for. So I think it's just kind of continuing. And I think this is still a very new movement, and so I think it's been making huge strides in the last few years, and it's only going to continue to get better. But I think it's things like this, panels like this, is opening up, talking about it at my restaurant, you with your filmmaking. I think it's just continuing to just educate. I mean, on my end, my staff, which I think just trickles down to consumers coming in, and then it's just gonna continue to get bigger and bigger. And like I said, I think it's a movement, and it's also a trend. I think in food, it's not just kale was huge, but its sustainability is big, I think, also.
And I would say, just really quickly, sustainability. I think people are getting sustainability fatigue. I mean, we even see that in the staff and how they engage in it and using that word over and over again. I think nutrition's going to do it, because we know that consumers will make a choice that's good for their body before they'll make a sustainable choice for the planet. And so there are groups like you said, Seafood Nutrition Partnership. Yeah. And I know that through all of the conversations that we're having, if we can really tout that this is literally by eating this twice a week, you are going to be able to have a healthier, more sustained life. This directly affects you. If you get it from a good fishery, if you get this fish from a good farm, you're getting something that is absolutely nutritious for you, that's not bad for your kids, not bad for your parents, kind of thing. So I think for us, it's telling a rounded story, but I do see a trend coming in that people are going to make that nutritional choice, and how we begin to storytell around that nutrition, I think, is going to be exceptionally important.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's sustainability. We all know what it means on this panel, but the challenge is that it means different things to different people, and depending upon who you talk to. But the one thing that some recent studies that we did with the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute told us is that consumers are equating sustainability with nutrition, with health and quality. Neither of those things are what sustainability means, but if that's what it takes for them to eat more seafood, we're going to definitely talk about those attributes along with continuing to talk about the sustainability. So I think that's the key too, is hitting on that nutrition piece. And we have worked with Culinary Institute of America, and they've been very active in that. So I know it's happening, but how do we get these ones that have been chefs for a while, get them on board to be these ambassadors?
Yeah. And I know Renee Erickson, Tom Douglas have been huge advocates for it out here in Seattle, but it starts kind of with the people kind of on the ground and talking about it and continuing to talk about it and raise awareness of it. And, that's just how it's going to continue to become more of a hot topic. And
I think
And
that's where
what
Whole
it is,
Foods
you know?
has done a great job because
Absolutely.
they hire for their fish and seafood case passionate fish and seafood advocates. They do such a good job with that, and I think that's where I'm at, where we work at Pacific Catch on it is we're just trying to tap into some passion that that server has that then they can connect the dots to their fish and seafood sourcing because almost all of our ingredients are fish and seafood from a protein perspective, and so we have to have them care about it. And these are people that just looked at this as transactional, and now we're getting them down to the aquarium and we're getting them to read the materials because videos or trying to get them to come in for separate trainings, like all that stuff is really hard given price at the restaurant, hourly wages, and that you have to pay pretty much for people to be trained.
Well, this is certainly a topic that we could talk all day about, but we are going to have to wrap it up. So I would like to thank all of my guests today, and thank you very much for being here and from all of us here. Thank you.